This presentation would be the beginning of our study of Beowulf, in turn the first major work in my hypothetical English Lit survey course. The first week of class outlined the trajectory of the course from the first major English work to the 21st century, and now we're starting at the beginning. If we're going to survey English literature, we have to start at the beginning of the English language. It's been written down almost as long as it's been spoken, and Beowulf is the earliest major work we have. As we start to read through sections of the book, you might be intimidated by the odd-sounding text, even in translation. However, once we work through some of the language, you'll find the epic poem more familiar than you originally thought, but also as action-packed and engaging as the epic battles of Lord of the Rings. In fact, you'll find that J.R.R. Tolkien was heavily inspired by Beowulf. The story begins at the end of the Roman Empire, hundreds of years before the setting of the book. The Roman language, Latin, had reached the island of Britannia, mixing with the native languages, Gaelic or Celtic, now Irish and Scottish Gaelic, Welsh, etc., and their cultures. The green represents the extent of the Roman Empire, and the red lines show the routes of invasion for barbarian groups which broke up the empire. Beowulf centers on some of these barbarians which came from this tiny peninsula and its surrounding islands. Beowulf gives us one of the best looks into the time period surrounding the birth of the English language. A timeline might help you grasp the spans of time covered by the poem. The Roman Empire ended around 476 AD, and many of its lands, including Britannia, fell into disarray. Over the next 100 years, groups like the Vikings sailed to and raided towns on the coast of Britannia. The culture represented in Beowulf of groups like the Geats, the Jutes, and the Angles was very similar to that of the Vikings. Overall, the peoples of medieval Scandinavia are called Nordic. One of their gods even wound up in the Avengers. Although the Romans might have characterized these people as barbarians, they had a rich culture full of artwork, craftsmanship, and spirituality. The Vikings are a helpful reference for visualizing the world of Beowulf, but the Nordic people were more than bloodthirsty raiders. As you read, I'd like you to take note of the cultural points that come through the text. Eventually, a group called the Anglo-Saxons, a combination of the Angles from the north and the Germanic Saxons, settled or conquered most of Britannia, adding their culture and Germanic language to the mix. The Sutton Hoo helmet shown here, this is a reproduction, is an example of the kind of archaeological finds from the area and time period of the Anglo-Saxon migration to Britannia. It is a great example of the level of craftsmanship these people had, even in the Dark Ages, and is very similar to the kinds of artifacts Beowulf might have used. The story of Beowulf was likely composed close to a century after the setting of the epic poem, possibly based on older stories brought to Britannia by the Anglo-Saxons from their homeland. However, the earliest written copy we have of the text was copied down approximately 400 years after the poem was originally composed. For all those years, the entire poem was passed on verbally, sung like lyrics or spoken as a recitation. It was likely written by a monk, one of the few people who could read or write in those days. This version of the story comes to us in what linguists consider Old English, the very beginning of our language. So taking this history all together, we can build a family tree for our language. Old English comes from Latin, what little was left by the Romans in Britannia, mostly grammar, Germanic from the Anglo-Saxons and other invading groups, and from the native Picts and Celts, Celtic language families. Now that you all know a little bit more about the historical, cultural, and linguistic changes surrounding the birth of English and the setting of Beowulf, I think you will find it a lot easier to see the connections between Beowulf's time and today, between this ancient epic and the summer blockbusters you saw in the past 3 months.